Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. So today what I will be presenting to you is part of my ongoing PhD research titled Alternate Readings of Spaces, the Gendered Response to Vizhinjam Port Development Project in Kerala. So, as seen in this diagram here, I'm currently planning my fieldwork. I'll be actually going for my fieldwork next month. So during this presentation, what I'll be showing you here is a context and the need for this particular study. So I will use this opportunity to make visible the issues that are currently being experienced by the indigenous community and to start a conversation about how they fit into the global scenario of neoliberal development and their impact on indigenous communities and the environment. So as my title suggested, through this research, I'm examining the alternate readings of spaces through the study of Vizhinjam Port project and the protests against it. I will be doing this by mapping residents' lived experiences in their everyday space and protest places through a gender lens as a means of counter-state development narrative. So why am I choosing gender? So because the gendered experiences are different, because the visible and invisible burdens placed on women should be investigated against the homogeneous identity called fishermen that the government and the popular discourses address. Because the gendered roles defined or framed in society marginalize and ridicule women who step out of these defined boundaries, and it is within these experiences that an alternative or counter-narrative of resistance against state development narrative can be amplified. In terms of location, Kerala is the southwestern region of India, and within Kerala, I'll be looking at Thiruvananthapuram, which is the capital city of Kerala, and within Thiruvananthapuram, I'm looking at the coastal villages in Thiruvananthapuram, mainly around Vizhinjam, which is the red location that you see, Vizhinjam, where the port project is located. So, a brief about the study itself. This port project has been in the plan for more than 30 years. The Kerala coast was seen as rich for development projects. The coastal community has actually been fighting development capitalist project since independence in 1947. The 1960s saw the fisherfolk resisting the capitalist imposition on their livelihood and the emergence of fishers' movements and transnational fishing communities and unions in the 1980s. The port project was finally granted to Adani Port under Gautam Adani in 2015, and the port project is being projected as the pride of India and as India's gateway to international transshipment. There have been protests against the port since its inception, most visibly seen in 2007 and for 6 months in 2022. A few of the impacts that are facing the fishing community are coastal erosion, several houses being washed away, and families being displaced and living in relief camps. Indigenous men are losing access to beaches as more of the beaches are being privatized for the port. The fishermen also claim that the existing harbors have become dangerous to launch boats, and many fishermen have lost their lives, have lost their livelihood, have lost boats because of this, the rougher seas, because of the construction. Despite these grievances and the auditor report of India in 2017 stating that the project is actually more favorable to the private sector, that is Adani Port, than the state, the current Communist Party of India Marxist government, the ruling state government, supports the project. And in a very rare showing in 2022 during the protests, both the CPIM and the right-wing Bharatiya Janata Party supported the project and villainized the indigenous fishing community within the media, within the popular discourse. So in terms of context, I will explain the background of the study through 3 sessions, that is through Kerala and gender, which is a premise of the study, the coastal villages in Thiruvananthapuram, which is the location of field of study, and finally the port project and protest against it, which is the case under study. So, Kerala. After independence, Kerala was seen as a problem state within the Indian Union due to the high number of protests and political mobilizations within the states. But in the 1970s, Kerala rose to fame in international development circles when it was noticed that Kerala had a high social development index, especially in health and education, comparable to those of developed countries. This is despite a low economic development. This anomaly was attributed to a robust civil society and public action where mass movements against social, political, and economic oppressions pushed the government to initiate policy actions for public services. It is also the most literate state in India with a low birth rate, low infant mortality rate, and as per the census of 2011, a sex ratio of 1.084. Several works have shown that female empowerment as a vital reason for the state's achievements. Although women's education and agency within Kerala have been praised, there exists a gender paradox. Kerala has a high female unemployment rate, high suicide rate, low female autonomy, and high rates of reported domestic violence. Mitra and Singh reason this is because women in Kerala are unwilling to be employed in manual labor and resist traditional social norms dictated by males, while the conservative and social and cultural structure in Kerala limits their advancement in the labor market and the social and domestic sphere. Within Kerala, the inborn capacities of women in the domestic sphere and the attributes of men in the public and political spheres are institutionalized. Despite increased visibility and space for women in politics since the 1990s, there remains a persistent marginality of women in politics. They enter local governance not as politicians, but rather as development agents. The women's entry into the civil, public, and political space was mediated through attributes of womanliness and altruism. This gendering of space affected the way gender is performed, constructed, and understood within Kerala. Now, moving on to the field or the location of study, Thiruvananthapuram's coastal community are deemed among Kerala's most disadvantaged. A majority of the fisherfolk in Thiruvananthapuram are Latin Catholics, and the church came to represent the community. The church spearheaded the strikes in the 1980s against state-sponsored development growth and against the port both in 2017 and 2022. Latin Catholics are actually synonymous with caste-oppressed Christian converts in the colloquial imaginary. European missionary conversions and Catholicism were brought to Kerala in the 16th century with the arrival of the Portuguese. Many caste-oppressed fishers from the Mukuva caste converted but continued to remain marginalized and treated as impure. Till the 1950s, actually, a system called as Padraudo, established by the Portuguese, was practiced in the coastal region of Thiruvananthapuram, where the priest is the highest authority in the community. And to date, the church plays an important civic and political role along with the religious. There exists a dynamic relationship between the coastal community with the church and the state. In fact, the church mediates the relationship of the villagers with the state and civil society. Now, the fisherwomen in this community encounter marginalization at the intersection of this caste, religion, and class. The slurs like Meenkari, which means fishwoman, or Chandapenungal, which means market women, reflects this. While fisherwomen are stigmatized for practicing unwomanly activities in the public sphere, they still function within the naturalized gender roles within the domestic sphere. Women's work, mostly in fishing-allied activities like vending, processing, and net making, are made invisible as it is seen as a loss of status. Corporatization, environmental degradation, and reduced fish stock force these artisanal fisherwomen to engage in more rigorous fish auctions. And even in scenarios where the government provides relief for livelihood loss, it is focused on both loss, that is men's occupation, leaving women's occupation or livelihood unaddressed. Finally, for the case study itself, with this promotion of the port as the pride of India, anyone opposing the project was seen as anti-national and anti-developmental. Christianity being a minority religion, the church feared these labels and initially supported the project. The internal class system also played a role because the well-to-do fisherfolk supported the project thinking of upward growth. But with environmental degradation, the church and the community at large started protesting the project. Women in the community face a backlash from the project as they fear in a fall in incomes, that is limited availability and increasing difficulty of work, patriarchal backlash, that is violence at home and in public spaces as they have to move further away from home for work, and heavier workloads, that is absence of men's work, leading to women to take more of the income generating and family duties. In the image seen here, these were the demands placed at the entrance of the port during the protest in 2022. In these, we can see the gendered language being used. While the first half of the demands are about housing, the second half is about livelihood, which addresses only the men's occupation. So from the literature, it became clear that there is limited study on the impact of the project and the response to it through a gender lens. How women negotiate gender-coded spaces in their everyday lives, and the spatial parameters matter to the question of women's agency. Women experience the impact of the project differently, and their response can provide an alternative understanding of the project against the state development narrative. Why? Because this research is timely and important right now because residents are facing the impact of the ongoing project, even as both the government and the port authorities either deny the responsibility or don't provide the required compensation and infrastructure. So the purpose of the study, the sea, the beaches, the coastal spaces are integral to the coastal community's history, livelihood, and identity, and are the heritage rights of the indigenous people. The lack of appropriate engagement with the local community produces an incomplete understanding of their occupational, cultural, and social spaces. By working with the women of the indigenous community, this research will provide them with a safe space, visibility, and agency for their voice, activism, and work to be amplified. So to address these purpose and knowledge gaps, the overarching aim of the research is to examine the alternate readings of spaces that emerge through residents' lived experiences in their everyday space and protest place through a gendered lens. I won't spend much time here, but these are some of the key words that emerged from my readings that frame the theory under which I situate myself, and also that led me to choose the methodology and methods that I will be using to answer the research question. Before I go to the methodology, I wanted to briefly show you the site selection criteria that were taken to choose the potential areas of study, which is seen here. Based on these criteria, the two villages that I selected for the study are called Vizhinjam and Vizhinjam. Vizhinjam lies outside what is called as corporate social responsibility, while Kuttapuram in Vizhinjam is adjacent to the port construction and lies within the corporate social responsibility. So the troubles facing both these villages in some cases are very different, but very similar in many other cases. And it's important to understand the lived experiences in both these scenarios to kind of give an alternative to the state development narrative. In terms of methodology, in this research, I adopt a qualitative approach through narrative inquiry with countermapping. In narrative inquiry, I will be focusing on the centrality of stories in understanding lived experiences. By critically engaging with the translation and the concept of co-authorship, dominant discourses can be challenged and bring the marginalized narratives to the forefront, giving rise to the theory of agency or that of the politics of the people. I use narrative inquiry with counter-mapping by using maps as a means for the subaltern, those who are made invisible in map spaces to redefine and show alternative spaces of lived experiences. Mapping provides the opportunity to give spatial information that is otherwise unknown or invisible, making it possible to understand how people feel and perceive space and place. Why this methodology? Because of subject's story ownership. The process of authorship becomes visible and counter-mapping along with the context of its production. Through the power of storytelling and spatial representation, understood as performative, this research can challenge the narrative about marginalized communities and places, exploring the experiences and perspectives to understand environmental degradation and dispossession. This diagram here illustrates the relationship between the methodology, methods, and the research questions. The first two research questions of reaction and response will be done through narrative inquiry using the two methods, that is focus group and walking and talking interviews. Through these methods, countermaps will be produced to respond to the third research question, that is how do the lived experiences in everyday space and protest place inform alternate readings of spaces. Now, regarding positionality, that is about myself. I come from a background in architecture and experience in community-oriented urban design. My understanding of the Vizhinjam Port protest is guided by secondary sources such as academic writings, traditional media, and official reports. I entered this field in the dual role of an outsider and insider. I'm a Malayali Syrian Christian woman who understands the local language and cultural context, but has been mostly shielded from many forms of communal and caste violence on account of having studied and lived outside of India for most of my life. My status as an outsider and insider will be explored reflexively during and post fieldwork. So I will end this presentation by reciting a small portion of a poem written in this particular report, which was released by the local indigenous community in the absence of the government refusing to have a conversation with the local indigenous community. So the poem goes, this is the last two paragraphs of the poem, to be fair. For what price must we pay to chase the dream? Sea walls rising high as nature's voice screams. The cost is steep, our environment pays a toll as we build walls that bind both body and soul. Let's heed the call of nature's gentle plea. Preserve the beaches, let them roam wild and free. Protect the fishers, their livelihood secure, for in harmony with the sea, we can all endure. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.